Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning at 9 a.m. On Friday, the last day of festival. So give yourselves a round of applause for getting up and being here. Thank you. Will you just double check, make sure your cell phones are off too, just so hopefully we'll turn into a delightful conversation that's not interrupted by the outside world. Thank you. And we'll welcome, come on in. Welcome people coming in. My name is Rich Brown, and I am the Region 7 Devising Coordinator, and one of the things I got to do besides seeing a lot of amazing Devise student work this week and being involved in workshops is organize this panel discussion presentation this morning with some of my favorite people in the world. So we've got 90 minutes together. The goal is we're going to talk a little bit about our experience, just because we've done some devising for about 45 minutes, and then hopefully we'll leave the other half to have a conversation so we can have some questions. So as we're saying things that you're like, I want to hear more about, or, oh, I've had this experience and I want to see if it connects to your experience, please just make notes to yourself there, and then at the end we'll have a time to just open it up for discussions. Okay? Great. So with that lovely panel, could I have you start by introducing yourselves? Let's start here.
John Schmorer from the University of Oregon.
I'm Jessica Burr, the Artistic Director of Blessed Unrest.
Matt O'Patterny, the Managing Director of Blessed Unrest, a company that we co-founded in New York City 18 years ago.
Easy does it.
And I should have mentioned, in addition to being the regional coordinator and the national coordinator for devising, I also teach at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, and I teach physical acting and devising there. Great. So I thought we'd start this morning just to kind of set a frame so our audience has an idea of where we're coming from by giving a brief introduction to first how we found devising, got into devising, and then a brief kind of like history of our work, just so they're aware of that. How about you two start this time, and we'll go this way.
Cool.
Okie doke.
So I went to school at Clemson University. We did no devising there, and then I graduated and started working at the Warehouse Theater in Greenville, South Carolina, where I had a weekend workshop with a woman whose name I forget, who did Viewpoints work with us, and it blew my mind. So then when I went to New York shortly thereafter, I found Ann Bogart and City Company and citi.org. You should study with them if you ever have the chance. They do an intensive in every June for a month, and it's awesome. So found Ann, studied with them in New York, and then she was teaching MFA directing at Columbia, and Columbia takes actors from outside the program to work with their directors, and their directors were doing a lot of devising, and that's where I met this one, and we were devising things. It was like we'd work for 4 days madly, show something in class to Ann Bogart and Robert Woodruff and the other directing students and get feedback directly from them. It was like going to grad school for free. It was really great.
Yeah, but we had never heard the word devising. I had never heard that word. We were just making what we needed to make, and we figured it was kind of experimental. But I don't remember caring what it was called. We were working so bloody hard. It was like, call it something if you want to. But
and they were doing a lot of taking source material. The first one I did was a Brecht thing where it was like this South African director was taking Brecht and Hamlet, and we had 3 days to make this 20-minute piece. We just worked our asses off and built this thing and showed it to them, and then got feedback.
I guess I remember the first time I really devised inside of my own company. We had been running this company for at least 10 years. I don't remember how long, and I had this play that I needed to make. And when you produce a show in New York, you're supposed to be able to speak about it articulately and sum it up in a succinct sentence, at most. And I couldn't talk about it. And I thought, I don't know. I couldn't describe the play, and I also sort of refused. I was like, that's not the piece. The piece is just something that we need to make, and then we'll know what it is, and then you can describe it if you want to. So we did, and it took a very long time. That was Eurydice's Dream. I don't remember how long we worked on it. At least a year, maybe two.
No, because it came out of our camp.
It came out of a different,
it was
it was about 2. I
To
said
that
it was about 2
final
years.
show?
I'm so glad we're
Some
in agreement.
years. There were some years.
It was some years. And we made the play, and there it was. And we had a lot of people working on this play. We had 2 writers, tons of brilliant designers who would also lead things. You know, I lean heavily on designers, and my lighting designer was right here the whole time, and the actors had tons of input, and it was all sorts of languages. It wasn't even just in English, it was in, I don't remember how many languages. We had a Brazilian, an Italian, a Russian. And then when it was done, it was like, that's the show. There it is, you're welcome. You know, we made it, but it wasn't something that could have been articulated early on because it didn't fit into English language. It couldn't be contained.
And that wasn't our first
one. And again,
That
it
was our
wasn't our
first
first
big
one. That
one.
was the first one that I felt was really successful.
And it was our first big one. We had done like those Come If You
Yeah.
Dare weeks, like we
That's true.
set up this
yeah.
structure where we would just rehearse for a week. We'd gather the ensemble, we'd publicize it, we're performing on this day at this time, it's free and it's called Come If You Dare. And we didn't, and it was just like, we're just gonna make something, and then, so those were our first forays.
Yeah, there will be
There will
beer.
be a lot of beer.
And we don't know what else is gonna show up. But that's how we practiced devising, but we didn't know it. We didn't know we were devisers, and then people started saying, oh, you're devisers, and then hiring us to devise. We're like, okay, cool, because we've been at this for a while. So that's our messy beginning.
It was similar for me. My very first Devise piece was when I was a junior in undergrad, never heard of the word, didn't know what devising was, and it came very personally. I was raised during the AIDS crisis and the AIDS scare, so the only public sex education I ever got was if you ever have unprotected sex, you will die, literally. And junior year of undergrad, I woke up to my friend who was weeping in the bunk above me, and asked what is going on, and Ben had had a night and had unprotected sex and knew that he was dead. And that's the first time I ever had what I now think of as a hunch to devise a show. Something in my artistic self said, something's not right here. I need to talk about, the only way I know how to talk about things in my life are through theater at that time, so I gathered some collaborators. I didn't know you could even do this, just gathered some collaborators, and we started talking, and we ended up creating a show that then got some money, and we toured it around when I was in undergrad to high schools and presented there. I had no idea it was called devising at that time. But then I was interested, while I was also doing scripted plays in my training, about that and whatever that impulse was to just make a play. And that led me into my graduate work when I started learning about the great devising companies in the American theater, such as the Living Theater and Bread and Puppet Theater and the Open Theater and you name it. And after my master's, then when it was time for my PhD, I knew I wanted to go and really educate myself about devising, which led me to the University of Oregon and this gentleman beside me. So I came, and that was my focus all through my 3 years of PhD. John was my dissertation advisor on my dissertation on Tectonic Theater Project. So I went and studied with Moises Kaufman and Tectonic, and then that introduced me to an amazing woman named Mary Overly and this amazing gentleman named Stephen Wong, and they were all like deviser, theater makers, creators. So through my own education, I got a secondary education through that by working with all these great artists, and that kind of set up my career. And suddenly devising was what I was going to do. I got so lucky to be hired at Western Washington University to create a devising program there. There was none when I came, and we've done that and now have had some success, and we devise a new show every other year at Western. At least we've done that for a number of years, and we have a year-long process that I've been working. It's part of my research to develop this process with my students, so it's developed and changed over my career there, and we've been very lucky with the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival to take shows to the National Festival in DC and also bring them to the regional festival. And now I'm the artistic director of the Marfa Devising Intensives down in Marfa, Texas every summer through Texas Tech University, and that's kind of where I am now.
Well, I had the luxury of teaching an undergraduate course in the Midwest on avant-garde theater, starting with the early 20th century, but really focusing on American 60s, 70s theater, all the way up to the Wooster Group. At that time, it was 1995.
I should have said the Worcester Group.
And then I went to London to teach for a semester, and I saw Shared Experience, Theater Complicité, they're called Complicité now, I think Forced Entertainment, and they were all calling themselves devising companies, and the critics were talking about this is a devised work, meaning this has been created by the performers. And when I got back to school, my students who were taking this avant-garde class said, "Why aren't we doing this kind of work anymore? What happened?" And I said, "Well, actually, we are still doing this kind of work, and there's a word for it, so let's do some." And I did my first devising piece, I think, in 1996. And then I got hired by the University of Oregon primarily because of this odd thing called devising, which I then had to prove in a production that was a burlesque vaudeville version of a 1494 series of sermons about fool types. It was called The Ship of Fools. And it got me into some trouble, but we're still devising at the University of Oregon.
Great. Next thing for us to talk a little bit about, what specific skills do you find teaching devising or working in devising has to offer to theater makers, young theater makers primarily, since that's our audience today, but really all theater makers, because you're working mostly with adult professional performers. We're working primarily with students, but also adult professional performers. But have you identified any specific skills that you don't think translates maybe in like a traditional acting class or traditional theater education that is unique to devising?
Yep.
Okay. I thought maybe it'd be a yes, but if no.
Well, I mean, I think that the ability to absolutely have no idea what's going on and live inside
To
of
live
that
in the
place.
unknown.
Yeah.
I call it creative terror. Yeah,
There you go.
You don't get that experience in a
Yeah.
traditional situation, educational situation. We're really careful to try and protect our students from failure, I think. So yeah.
That's why we named our company Blessed Unrest.
Exactly.
It's like
Yeah.
when you feel that, that's the good place. That's
Yeah.
you want to live there and create from there.
Yeah.
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 And you have to stay relaxed. It's okay, you know, you have to find a way to relax your shoulders and breathe. But yes, be terrified, be embarrassed, be totally unsure of yourself, and keep breathing and
Yeah.
stay in it.
Yeah.
To be able to create a space in which to live in that place, to never get comfortable,
Yep.
and to know that once you start feeling comfortable in a certain way, you have to break the form and start again, find a new form, find a new space.
And I think a lot of traditional theater is just too damn comfortable. Like everybody's working so hard at being relaxed that there's no fire for me often. And I think devised work is often really bad. I mean, we see some terrible devised plays, but there's usually some fire there. Whether it's good or not, there's usually like something going on that's alive.
The only class I teach that has that same element is clown. And it's for the similar reasons. They have to create a solo act from nothing. And they're suddenly dog paddling. And there's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
And you're not doing it right if it's not scary and if it's not filled with failure.
And I find it's changing, you know. I'm like 13 years now at Western. I've seen it develop where, when Teach to the Test came in and No Child Left Behind came in and the idea of rubrics started getting introduced, like this idea to say to students, but I see them love it, to say like, we don't know what it is. It's the unknown. We've got to learn to live in the unknown and this courageous terror. And there's real terror there, but also down deep in the DNA, there's an excitement, and they know, like, I've been missing this. This is what I need more and more of, as opposed to tell me what's going to be on the test so I can get to the test and boom. And now to go back into process and just be curious about process, to find and celebrate failures, I think it's so freeing. Or I watch it, I see my students' shoulders drop when it's like a light switch. The terror will like either suffocate you or it will just send you.
But we need that now.
Yes.
We need that
Yeah.
in this place that we live in, where reality doesn't exist anymore. By official decree, it changes every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
When the rug of reality is so ripped out from under us all the time, and we're the ones who can say, we're not going to panic. We know where we are. We know where we are because we do. And by the force of our will, we will continue to make work in this place.
And that when that rug is pulled out, we talked about this with one of the groups yesterday, like we're creating in the rehearsal space, the creative space, a process that could mirror how we want the world to look, like a true collaboration, a true like participatory democracy, where we like work against hierarchy and everyone's voice is heard and we incorporate ideas before we judge them. And
Yeah, and in
That's
this
a real skill,
ugly,
I think.
ugly world,
Right.
we can make beautiful things. We can create beautiful worlds in this place that every day is so much more awful.
Yeah.
Really, we can say, no, we're going to go into a room and we're going to create something that you can see. And then you create things that we can see. And then we have a dialogue. But it can't all be contained within language. It's not something that can be written on a matchbook. Someone.
Something I love about training actors to devise, or working, being here and teaching some devising workshops, whatever, is not for the devised work that will be created, but it's how that impacts all the traditional work. In that, I think, yes, devised theater is adding great productions to the American canon, and, Laramie Project would never happen if it weren't for this kind of theater, but it also excites me for what it does, how it wakes up traditional theater. When I was a young actor and I would approach a role, it was like, I approached it to figure out the character. Like, I gotta figure out this character in this sort of, this way, right?
Controlling way.
I
yeah.
gotta figure it out. I gotta dig in and figure this guy out. And now after devising, it's like, when I'm digging for the places that I will never figure out. What are the things about this character that are so much bigger than me, so much broader than me, that I will never figure out? And those are the fun places. And approaching the process as approaching every play as a devised play, in terms of, it's my responsibility to make this thing what it's going to be, and I'm not trying to figure out the playwright.
Right.
Yeah.
I am doing that also, but in parallel, no, I'm devising a play within the Romeo and Juliet.
Well, and now we have playwrights who are writing open texts for us.
Yeah.
Which is
Inviting
closer.
it.
It's not devising, but it's closer. I just had a fabulous time directing Love and Information by Carol Churchill. No character descriptions, no character names.
You get to choose who
And
speaks what.
We all went to rehearsal every night together and figured things out with each other. So I think that's happening in more than just Churchill's writing. I think there are other writers doing that too.
Another specific skill that I've been thinking about a lot lately, that I think happens in traditional theater training, but it does seem to happen more in devising, is this our ability to learn how to articulate very clearly. Because if you're the theater makers, you've got to be able to find a shared language together and to really precisely identify, why is this moment impacting us, or why is this moment matching our intention and this moment is not matching our intention. And before I really started devising, I don't think I had the specificity of articulation that I've gained now, and that I try to instill still with my students and help them talk to each other that precisely, because that for me is how the work progresses.
That just made me think that, I don't know if it's a skill, but it's an after effect. Students who get to do a devised project somehow are more clear about intention
Yeah, yeah,
in other people's work.
yes, yeah.
Like when they watch something else, they've got a different idea about what started this,
Yeah.
or what's
Yeah.
being attempted.
Well, yeah, and that's another skill, is like, I can tell the actors who walk into a scripted play who have done some devising, because they don't wait for the director. Like, they're already making choices, they're already doing things, they're like,
Yeah.
they're up there making, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's a real skill to get out of that, I'll sit back and wait, versus like feet forward, I'm gonna make this choice, I'm gonna do this thing.
Yeah, it's so instinctual as well, and being able to not to work without justifying, or also work
Yeah.
without
Right.
articulation. Sometimes the articulation takes
comes
time.
after, yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly,
of
you
course,
make
of course.
first, and then you look back and you say, oh, this is what that was.
I think you always make first and then come back. Not always, but
Well,
Yeah.
and another skill might be that it's uncommon for actors to be involved in the design process.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
usually separated
Yes.
and with very clear boundary lines. And it's always been fun for to watch my acting students realize there are limitations. Designers need better information. They're there to help, but they're also there to create with you, not
and that
serve.
can be a collaboration
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote a whole article about that.
You did.
I did.
Grade A.
Yay. But designers can also, my designers play a very different role in our process. My sound designer will often lead the room.
Mhm.
Or if we
Yeah.
have the ability, the lighting designer will lead a room as well. And we push against it and we play with
Yeah.
what that is.
Yeah.
He's fun.
Any other skills before I take us to a little? So, Burr, you were talking about, like, especially in the world today and what's happening today, and we have this opportunity. Can Can we think about some ideas of how devising seems particularly relevant in the world of today or in the theater of today? If we want to make a case for that. Like, what is it about the devising that makes it unique for the world of theater today?
It embraces the complexity of humanity.
And it's not one voice, you know. We're working on a play right now that's about digging into the legacy of slavery in America, and the lead creators are two Caucasians, and this is an important story that Caucasians need to be telling, because we played a huge part in the system of slavery, but we can't tell it alone. And so either we, in a traditional sense, like wait and read and hope that somebody writes the play that speaks to this thing we want to talk about, or we gather collaborators who don't look like us and whose family backgrounds are not like ours, and then we make the play together. And I think when we're dealing with the complex issues that we're dealing with in this country, they can't be told from one perspective. You can't, and it's the rare thing that you have the playwright that is that brilliant that they can sit by themselves and write the play that addresses things in a big way like this. And they're out there, they exist, but they're rare. So we can, and I'm not that, like I'm not that good, I'll never be that smart, but I can gather enough perspectives together and have my director who's also brilliant, and then we make the thing together, and it's going to be sufficiently complex.
Yeah, a form that celebrates multivocality, I think, is so key right now.
Yeah, I think I think this is the same thing, but I would say it's good to learn that our differences are a resource, not a problem. And devising does that in a way that I don't think any other kind of theater does.
When you were talking last night about starting in devising because of the lack of female roles, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I was drawn to the first several projects I did because I had the freedom to say it's going to be at least 50% women, and we're not going to be restricted by character or character analysis, which I think is liberating for our students. Not that they're not going to do some traditional acting in a devised work, but that's low priority.
And for us, there are just better, we have better women. We're an ensemble, and in New York, there are a lot, in theater, there are a lot more women actors than men. There just are. And therefore, the men who are good get paid more. And we're a company that pays a little bit. So when we hold open auditions, 75% of the respondents are women. It's just the way it goes. So our ensemble is woman heavy, and the talent pool we have is woman heavy. So when we create a play, we cast the play before we know what the roles are. So we can say, we want to work with this pool of talent. And then we build the play to suit them.
Yeah, and it's also extremely diverse. We have people from all over the world in our company, and they have funny accents, and they can't get cast in traditional plays. And we cast them because they're brilliant artists. And also, we force diversity into our work. It's a bit ironic that we're four white people working here because we always make diverse plays. We insist upon it because it's bloody necessary. You have to create the world that you want to be, and that's the world that we want. And yeah, it is led by women and led by people of color and led by people with funny accents who come from different countries. And again, it's like you get into this room of people and you have to say, what is it? You can't say this is the thing. So different ways of asking that question.
And some actors are bad auditioners. And I think about one of our best in our ensemble is Josh, and he's a terrible cold reader. He's the worst. He is, and his auditions, he's just a lousy auditioner because he just can't lift it off the page. But he's brilliant. Like his skill set is enormous, and he's done a ton of mime. Like that's where his sort of bread and butter is mime, and he works at the Metropolitan Opera as a supernumerary because they don't have to talk and because he doesn't have to audition for it. But we know Josh has skills, so we just cast him and then build the role for him.
Yeah.
Makes a hell of a reindeer.
I think that's happened for us as educators, right? You cast the student who has never gotten
The role,
past the audition process.
Yeah. And for many, I've found my students, suddenly they are interested in playwriting. They didn't know that they were a playwright, or suddenly they're like, oh, I'm curious about this thing about design because I got to collaborate with the designer in the room, and suddenly you see these other areas of theater kind of light up for them.
And then you can build, Tatiana, when she came to us, was not a great actor. She was a dancer. She'd been a ballerina her whole life and grew up in Russia and had a funny accent. And now she's a brilliant actor, but we cast her because it's like, wow, we're a physical theater company, and she had this mad set of skills. And now
Just
she's
an extraordinary presence. Yeah, but she basically learned how to act.
And 10 years later,
by making
she's
plays with us, and now
brilliant.
she's leading processes.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that makes devising unique for like now is that word now, like theater of the now. It gives young artists especially an opportunity to find their voice and to have a process and a system to say your voice wants to be heard. And I think one of the unique aspects of it is we can identify who the audience is before we start. So we can say we're making a play for 22-year-olds, and there's not a heck of a lot of theater that's made for 22-year-olds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what do you want to talk about? What do we want to, here's I can bring the process, I can create the atmosphere, but you've got to bring the passion and the ideas and the curiosities and the questions and what you feel a need to communicate to people your age. And I think that's a unique thing that devising offers that few scripted plays are offering.
Yeah, that's true. It allows us to address the issues of right now,
The now, yeah.
very, very quickly. Yeah, whereas a traditional process takes years sometimes to do that.
Yeah, there are brilliant plays being written now that won't land
In a
your
theater.
schools,
No.
won't
Yeah.
be
3
published
to
and
5
available
years.
to you guys for years.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and also in terms of process, in a way it takes the pressure off. I'm a director, but I don't have to be the most inspired person in the room every day. It's my job to listen, to listen very, very hard, because there's always someone in the room who's on fire, and it doesn't have to be me all the time. It's not always me. It just
And the ensemble
isn't.
can recognize that too. You can be in rehearsal and just notice, like, Burr has no idea what to do right now, so we gotta figure it out. It rarely happens. Rare.
Well, no, but our ensemble knows that they have to take responsibility.
Yeah.
It's
I think
their-
that's another reason for why it's important now, is shared responsibility and recognizing that sometimes it's better to listen. Those are things we need now in the larger world.
Yeah.
Great. We're doing great in terms of time, so we can have a nice discussion here.
Good.
Only because we've been devising for a few years. Have we identified or recognized any pitfalls or traps that we maybe, if we think, what would we tell our younger devising selves to be aware of?
I would say autobiography.
Tell us more.
I think the bad devising I've seen tends towards the confessional, and we don't need any more of that. We have that on so many different platforms around us. But also I think for younger people who are, I want to have them experience the benefits of devising. That's a road from my experience that can often lead to an unhappy result.
I would just add to that, I think I would disagree a little bit, except you have to use metaphor and you have to use your collaborators.
Yeah.
Like it can,
Yeah.
like I can come, one that's in early germination for me is very personal. It's
Sure.
directly from my childhood experience, but it has to be told with through metaphor, and I have to tell it with my collaborators.
And you have to give it over to your
Yes.
collaborators.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's
it
what
cannot be
I think
Yeah.
the autobiography ends up becoming so precious to the performer who brings it into the room that it can never be manipulated like we do with elements of art. There isn't any way to grow from it.
Yeah, and I've identified that personally for myself when I'm setting in device piece. This isn't working for me. And it's autobiographical. I've identified the moments like, oh, it's because I don't need to be here. Like I can tell from the work, like this isn't about or for me at all. It's literally for the performer.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's how, in my brain at least, I distinguish between devised work or all theater that is either therapy or therapeutic. Like if it is for the performer and the audience literally could not be in the room and it had the same result, that
Yeah.
is performed therapy.
Yep.
Versus if we're having something and I can tell this is through metaphor, through symbol, encouraging me to be a part of the theater making with the performers, then it can certainly be therapeutic, but it's for all of us, not just for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say just don't take yourself too seriously.
No doubt.
That's
Exactly.
my
Yeah.
And I think there's
2 cents.
a companion pitfall, which is sometimes you see devised plays that are totally impersonal. That it's like, we are going to devise a play about this issue over here.
That
And we're
are
going
almost
to do
smug,
our
yeah.
research about this issue, and it has it's got
No connection to the core, yeah.
What's the, your loins, it's got no,
Yeah, no guts, no like, yeah.
because it's held out here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
it's
has-
a different
it has
kind
to
of
be personal.
preciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be risking everything that you have.
I agree
Yeah.
with it, not taking yourselves too seriously. I do think there are devisers who imagine themselves in a therapeutic role towards their audience.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
it,
You
it's
can
just not
smell
very,
that.
it's not very fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it's condescending and dreadful.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it takes-
Thank
Don't
you.
be condescending and dreadful.
Yeah.
it takes
Yeah.
a certain level of arrogance to do this kind of work, because if you're taking Arthur Miller, then you're relying on his genius, right? Like, we're gonna do our best swipe at this beautiful person's play.
Right.
If you're devising, then you're saying, what we have to say is as worthy as what Arthur Miller had
Right,
to say. We're
right.
that good collectively. So it takes some arrogance, but at the same time, you have to constantly recognize, like, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
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 And the fact is, though, as a woman, no one wrote this part for me. No one wrote my voice in the way that I need to express it. God damn it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Cut that out. Edit that out.
Mhm.
I have a terrible, I curse like a sailor. No one wrote the thing that I'm trying to express. And so while it isn't about me, it is about me. And it's also about, my daughter. I'm trying to raise this person to have a voice and everyone else's daughter. And it's very, very important that we model what it means to at least struggle to find our voice. And even if we fail, and even if we sound like idiots, no, we need to do this. We need to keep pushing against this thing. And all women need to keep pushing against it. And if your only excuse is, Arthur Miller didn't write this for me, so I gotta do it. Sorry, guys. That's enough. Keep working. It's very, very important that women keep working and finding it's not just language, it's also movement, it's how do you move? How do you find your breath when you're taught your whole life not to breathe? When you're taught your whole life not to speak? How do you find your voice then? Because that's what it is.
No doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if there's any.
Soapbox.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a good soapbox, though. I like that
You like my
soapbox.
soapbox?
I love
Yeah.
it.
Thanks.
Love them all. I was thinking about one other pitfall that I've witnessed, where there's an idea because you're the devisers and you've made the work, you've researched it and you've created it and all that. That I've seen. I think a lot of devising companies will truncate the rehearsal process, or they won't do like the traditional theater work of
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about the intention in this moment. Let's
Yeah.
really figure out the best spatial relationship here. And there's like, well, we made it so we know it, so we'll rehearse it for a week and put it up. Instead of like, if I was paying dramatists rights for this script, we made this script. I'm going to rehearse that thing for 4 to 5 weeks, and we should do the same with our device pieces.
Yeah, not enough interrogation.
To really dig deep
They
into
need
it.
more
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And stopping creation early enough to give you time to really dig into what you have instead of like.
Well, there's also that mother of necessity, that mother of invention thing. You also have to I think with my students, the deadlines need to be clear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly just to amp up the creative terror. It's like, we need to do this. We can't keep talking about it.
Yeah.
And to be
Yeah.
respectful to all your collaborators, like
Yeah.
to the shops. I tell my students all the
Right,
time, your
right.
lack of planning is not going to be someone else's emergency. You're not going to be like, I had this creative idea about this amazing dress,
Yeah.
costume shop, work
Yeah.
all night to make this thing happen. No, that is not respectful
Yeah.
work. So like,
Yeah.
those deadlines are key.
Yeah. It reminds me of a cast I had once who wanted to start the show by breaking out of a gigantic egg. And I said, interesting idea. Let's bring Jerry Hooker, our set designer, in to talk about that. And he was so good. He said, I love this idea, and we can do this for you, but then there won't be anything after that. The giant egg will be all we make.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it was up to the group to decide,
Yes or no?
Do
Yeah.
we want the giant egg? No, we
Yeah.
really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the best thing, thanks for bringing that up, the best thing I ever heard from a colleague, faculty designer, also scenic design, was he came in and told one of my companies at the beginning, he's like, this is your budget, this is the number of hours, resources you have in the shop. This is the same for all of our other productions. Great. And he said, and he looked, which is like literally the first week, right now you have a black floor in this black box theater. If we spend every one of those dollars and every hour in the shop building stuff and using it and trying it, and then your final performance, we have a black floor in a black box because everything didn't work. He's like, that's success.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, but to find designers who will collaborate that way, who understand that that's really what devising is. It is
Yeah.
a process of failure. It's a process of we have to build it and get it in the room and try it, and maybe not the exact thing, but a replica, you know, a sketch version of it to experiment. And then if the experiment doesn't work, we have to have the guests to say, we're gonna not. The audience just won't get to see that beautiful dress that took 24 hours to make.
Yeah, that's what lobby
Eek.
display
I know,
is all
eek.
about.
I try to avoid those.
Oh, me too.
Those kinds of dresses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had design for that show, I should say, after he said that, but I love that he said that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That's
That's very profound.
fair.
Yeah,
Any
I
other-
tell my cast.
yeah,
I mean, I
pitfalls?
I say. Well, yeah. I mean, mostly I think it's getting too caught up in your own, is allowing it to be too precious, and hanging on to it
Yeah.
as yours too
Yeah.
hard. I mean, that's. Oof,
We had a
that's
huge
bad.
pitfall with a recent show that was it was great and it was successful, but it could have been better. And the reason it wasn't better, we spent 2 years building this one, and some of the cast that ultimately performed it had been with it from day one. So I say 2 years, but that's like a 3-week workshop here, and then 2 months later a 1-week workshop, and then 6 months later a month-long workshop. You know,
But living with it for 2 years.
living with it for 2
still,
years, and
which
it was
is
very
deep.
personal to the cast members. It was, you know, stories coming from them. It was very autobiographical, but it was autobiographical from each ensemble member almost. So, and some of them were with it for 2 years, and then we got to like literally 2 weeks from opening, where finally the two of us saw some of the problems, and it was like 2 weeks before opening, after 2 years, we realized that character has to be cut. Those two characters need to be combined. This relationship needs to be over here, not over here, and we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because it was,
Yeah, it was too precious.
it wasn't too late. We had plenty of time to make those changes. We could have made those changes in 2 days, but we couldn't do it because
The
it was
cost
too personal. It was like,
to the
that
company.
will destroy the ensemble
Mhm.
because that person will be in it. We just couldn't.
Yeah.
So we're looking at this thing all through the run and getting reviews and just thinking, reading reviews and like, yeah, we know. We
Mm.
know.
Yeah.
We know we could have.
We learned
and
so
we
much
couldn't
on
do
that
anything
show.
about it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I always tell my cast, in terms of the creative process, it will be, everyone will have a voice in the room up until 2 weeks before we open, and then I will start cutting things, and I will tell you, this is how we're gonna do it now.
Yeah.
So it's not a democracy at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
Not
Right.
for us.
It's
Yep,
yeah,
yep,
that's
yep.
just how we do it.
We're kind of getting there already, but just now we're into like any rules that you have about devising. It sounds like we're kind of talking about that.
Yeah.
And then we can go to discussion after that.
I don't know if it's a rule. I don't really call it a rule, but I try to get students used to not spending a lot of time in what if. It's like if a really good idea starts to come out of somebody, I say, great, don't tell us any more. How much time do you need to bring it back into the room to do it?
Yeah, yeah.
I tell them this is a construction zone. You have to keep your hard hat on.
Yeah. Speaking of the Worcester group, above their workbench in their office, it says action, not ideas.
Yeah.
Like spray painted on the wall.
And that's, I mean, so I don't present it as a rule, but it's something I'm watching out for right from the beginning. I have rules for myself.
Mm. What are those?
Participate.
Mhm.
So in every devised work I've done with students, I've written a scene or I've written a song. But I'll put some of my stuff in, and they get to decide if it's going to stay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying for me, of course, because I'm one of those idiots in
Mhm.
theater. I mean, I like idiots in the theater, so I typically end up bringing something that's kind of off kilter. One of the rules I have for myself came from a bad experience, and that is always have a dedicated scribe in the room. Because if I'm really working the way I should be working, I don't have time to take notes
Yeah.
Yes.
about what
Dramaturgs,
happened.
man. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody else has to do that.
Yeah.
And in like movement work, you can't take notes.
Right.
So
Or video.
my
is a
last
good tool.
scribe, videotapes,
Yeah.
which was really just very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there rules or guiding principles, or how you pick your word?
I mean, my own rule is just constantly refresh my vision and my hearing and all of my sensory input mechanisms to be able to see and hear what is actually happening and not what I think is happening.
Yeah.
Or
And it's-
predicting what will happen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like if I can do that successfully, the rest of it will come. But to be able to live in the not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
When I'm writing, and this is for Devise, but just in general too, is always question the gender and race of the characters you're writing, and not right away. Excuse me. Sometimes I just need to start writing, and it's like, the main character is always a young man because that's what I know. But then at a certain point, and I let that happen for a while, and then at a certain point, step back and say, okay, does this need to be a man? Does it need to be a white man? Do any of these characters need to be men? And just there just has to be a point at which you question your casting, because we are products of our society, and we have assumptions that are not that don't come from us necessarily. It comes from how we're raised.
When I start a year-long process at Western with my students, one of the first things we do in the research phase is we come up with a list of credos for ourselves, like how are we going to work? So in a way, that's a rule, a guiding principle. It comes from that ensemble. But one of the things that I'll always add to the list, if my students don't add it first, is this idea of no festering, which I think we have to keep reiterating, because in our culture we are so avoidant of conflict, or we love agreement so much that we have to again create a space where disagreement is not only okay but is encouraged. And we have such a tendency to like this little thing, and I'll keep it inside, and then it just grows grows and grows, and then it just can erupt and destroy an ensemble. So no festering is definitely one of my credo rules. And then the other one I learned the hardest of hard ways, say from the very beginning, anything that is brought into the room is open and owned by the company. And I learned that the hard way because Deviser brought in this beautiful moment, and the whole company, there's one of those moments in a rehearsal space where everyone's jaw is just on the floor, and all the hairs are sticking up on your arms, and she got done and said, but I don't want that to be in the show. And it was pure therapy for her. But I hadn't made that rule, so she didn't know she couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And just like all of us, and that's, again, I could just feel a fissure in the ensemble from that, because everyone's trust had been broken by saying, here's this amazing moment, and you can't take it, you can't use it. So now is, if you don't bring it in the room. We don't even want to see it unless you are offering it to your company that everyone else can use. And for autobiographical stuff, like in our work, oftentimes there's autobiographical, but one rule that I try to follow, but it doesn't always work, is because I'm interested in character and I'm interested in acting, is if you bring it in, unless it is identity specific, right, in terms of race, gender, sexuality, you name it, someone else in the company will be performing that, so that they can take that material and perform it as a character instead of performing it as the autobiographical person. And that's part of that, like, ownership by company instead of individual ownership of the work.
We sort of do, but we also offer, because we're not always doing stuff that's brought into the room, we're often doing stuff that, we're creating in the moment, in the space. And sometimes as an artist, you create it and it's really personal and really deep, and then you realize, I can't put that on stage. My mother's gonna come to this show. I can't, and I think we have to have we allow the freedom. You have the right to say, I'm sorry, that can't be in the show.
Yeah.
So that it frees me up, it frees me up in the moment to not edit myself, because my mom's that's a real thing. Like,
Right.
my dad's gonna come to this show, so how do I tell the story about him when he's gonna be there?
We also train, though, So when we're working, it's not always a rehearsal process. We train as an ensemble, which is a place to just to fail and to break our process, to take the process that we've sort of gotten used to and maybe gotten comfortable with, and to say that's not what we do anymore. What do we do? You know, and yeah, we create things that cannot be used, and we fail, and we have profound experiences together, which is wild. You know, around the election and around the Kavanaugh hearings, training was like a revolution. It was
Fierce.
wild.
Yeah.
It was so fierce.
Yeah.
And everyone in the room knew that this was never going to be seen by anyone.
Sure,
We
sure.
weren't working on anything. I mean, we were working on anything. We were working really, really hard. But it wasn't, it's like that
Yeah.
question of if the
Yeah.
hand claps in the forest and nobody's there,
Right.
does that mean anything?
But we
for
have to
us,
trust that
training
that's going to come
does.
out in the next show, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, because that's the
Yeah.
foundation, is the training, the constant,
Exactly.
continual training.
Yeah.
And even if you're not working on a piece about the Kavanaugh hearings, how everyone's feeling about that becomes part of the work. I
Yeah.
mean, it
It's in
doesn't
the
get
room. Yeah.
it's not screened out. It's so
Well,
interesting how,
That's good.
and I think that's more of the now thing.
Yeah, that's something we haven't
Yeah.
said so far is, I think we all, from our conversations are in agreement, the primary resource are the human beings in the room. Like,
Yeah.
that is what you are starting with. So we don't want them to forget what they're bringing into the room. We want to encourage them, bring whatever you're feeling about Kavanaugh into the room, and we'll just see how it affects the work, whether it's, we're making a piece about Kavanaugh or
Yeah.
not. Like, bring your humanity in, and we'll
Yeah.
use that.
Yeah, and I don't even think you have to actually invite it, as long as you've created the space for,
Right.
you know, the training to become so oddly fierce, and then you go, oh yeah, well, we are in troubling times. You know.
Yeah, we weren't talking about it.
Right.
But to bear witness to what was happening in the room. And also for me, it's a way to work very differently, because I am a director, I'm the person on the outside, but it's a chance for me to be on the inside. And I won't say this is what we're doing now in training anymore. We've sort of shattered it's not a class. It's like we go into the room, and if nothing happens, it's not my damn fault, because I'm not in charge anymore. The room is in charge now.
Yeah.
And I get to listen and follow, but and participate in a way that's very different, and that feeds the way that we behave when we are making a play, when we are in rehearsal.
And I think the training, once you get out of school, the structure of training with your mates doesn't exist anymore unless you create it. So we've created that for ourselves, where we have an ensemble of artists, and we meet regularly and devise. We train in physical theater and we devise. And it's not for any reason except to do it. So, and sometimes we'll do it once a month. We'll have 4 hours, a whole month, where we gather 20 people in a room, we train for 4 hours, we build pieces, and then it's over. But you have to keep that alive, because if you just wait until you're going to devise a piece once every 2-3 years, your muscles are all
You
atrophied. So yeah, find a way to train.
Can I jump us into the
Yeah,
discussion? Because
yeah.
we've done, like, this never happens. We're only 5 minutes over our game plan of just like talking for a while and then just having a discussion. So now we've got plenty of time to just field some questions and riff and have more of a dialogue with all the people in the room. So
Pressure's on you now.
yeah, pressure's on you now. Let's start back there in the back and then come forward here, and then Gabby third.
I have a lot of questions, but
Okay.
You say train. What does that look like more specifically? Are you creating etudes and you're saying, cool, let's bring in, you're sending people away with a theme or an idea and then saying, cool, let's create a thing where it's a beginning, middle, end, or does that all happen at the room? Like, what is that, how do you define that?
Well, we began training almost 20 years ago with more specific ideas and exercises, and having both trained the City Company and Bogart, we started with that. And so we always do viewpoints. I mean, that is really the foundation of our work still. So we did viewpoints, we did Suzuki, we made composition, and then as our company grew, we brought in Grotowski work and Lecoq and other things started coming into the room.
We did some Meisner for a while. It was like whatever
Yeah.
the skills are of our ensemble, we create a space of like, yeah, teach us what you have, Tatiana, and then we encourage our ensemble to invent new forms. So Tatiana has this ballet background, and she's we need to encourage her more. She's like dipping her foot in the pool of like, how do I take this ballet training and apply it to physical theater? And then Ben is doing great stuff. He's got martial arts training, and is like martial arts is a huge part of his life, and he's taking martial arts and turning it into like where does martial arts and viewpoints and Lecoq all meet, and what's that new form that he's creating? So he'll experiment with us, and we'll play around, and then we do devising, where we'll do some of the stuff we've been doing in workshops this week, where it's just coming out of viewpoints. We start making pieces, and sometimes we end up with five-minute pieces at the end of our 4-hour session that we just look at.
Oh, yeah, training though right now, 20 years later, is changing a lot, and we've consciously said we're not going to say what this is anymore, because then it's fascistic, essentially. We won't define it, we refuse. So we get into the room and we just start working. And for me, to my mind, this is really exciting, because it really is, there isn't a form actually that has been articulated. We'll articulate afterwards what happened, but while it's happening, it's like we're in this room with people whom we trust so deeply that we can do anything. And that's a terrifying and horrible thing to say to any artist. You can do anything. Well, thanks, you know.
And
but,
there's still
but
leadership,
things
though.
Yeah,
do
that's
happen,
that
but the
balance.
leadership is past now,
Yeah.
in a way, and it's passed freely. It's
But at
it's
any
passed
moment
without
there'll
talking
be-
about how it's passed, which is really nice.
There will be a leader at any given moment, though. I mean, we'll be working on something, and then somebody in the room will say,
Yeah.
I want to, this thing we're doing, now let's throw this at it.
Right.
And then they'll take the lead for 20
It's
minutes.
looser than that, though. They'll just pick it up. They
Sometimes.
won't. Well, now that's what's happening, and that's what I'm most excited about.
And it took us 20 years to get there.
Yes,
we
that's true.
couldn't handle that coming out of school. We had to
Yeah.
just spend 20 years practicing the skills that we had learned elsewhere, and then combining them. And that's where it got exciting, is when you have a diverse ensemble with diverse training backgrounds, and then that intersects with this, and you find a new form.
I don't remember where the Grotowski is or the Lecoq
don't
is
even know.
anymore. I don't know. It's like it's all
It's just
meh.
work.
Yeah, it's just the work.
Yeah. Who was that? Yeah.
Hi, hey. So I was super lucky to go to an undergraduate institution that really, really valued devising as
It is lucky. Yeah.
way. Yeah. And we also got to have an international theater festival, so we got to see all of these international theater companies doing basically devising work. It's a University of New Mexico. And I know you're from New York. How do we create an environment, a theatrical environment, a theatrical community that fosters and values this type of work in markets that don't necessarily reward the weird shows that nobody's heard of before? Is my question.
I heard that inhale. You start.
I think the sea change has to be encouraging audiences to not know, which is the process that devising begins with. Getting people excited about going to shows that don't have familiar titles, and there is that community, and they exist in almost every city that I can think of where I know people are devising. And when you find that community, that becomes part of the pleasure of going. Is who knows what they're going to do the next time? Yeah.
Yeah, I think two things. One, make sure you look up net.org, the network of ensemble theaters. There is this community nationally in the U.S. And then two, it is one of those things, I think, of if you build it, they will come. But I think it's, you've got to build it and also participate in setting the frame. So I think we like to assume, or we just want audience, well, just come, be this adventurous spirit. But you know, there's time and money, there's resources for them to be away from their family and that. And so I think we also have a job to be advocates and ambassadors, and not just theater makers, but also theater ambassadors, and to set the frame and say, this is why you should come to this thing you don't know anything about. This is exciting, and this is going to be different than your friend who wants to go see the Broadway musical at the big road show down the street. You've got an adventurous spirit. There's something about your soul that's unique. Come be with us, and then bring 3 of your friends, and then have them bring 3 of their friends, you know what I mean? And then you build an audience of following over years and decades.
Can I just say one more thing? We can model this in our classrooms if we could just throw out our syllabi and get our students used to the notion that when you come to class, you don't get to know what the next thing is. I don't know what the next thing is until I see what you've brought. I think there's a rigidity in the marketplace that has leaked into the classroom, and it's getting worse, in my experience. And I think we should stop doing it.
I think the American theater has a big problem, has a lot of problems, but the big one that I'm seeing right now is that we're modeled, it's very hierarchical in terms of how it functions. So for example, our company, we do work that is considered off Broadway, which has the implication that we want to be on Broadway. It's like we're down here and we want to be up here, which is not true at all. We'd love to be on Broadway. I recognize that my
On our own
work
terms.
is never going to be on Broadway, and I'm not interested in that. So, and I think the regional theaters have a big power too. It's like we see the big institutional theaters, and we think that's the goal. And all of the education that we've got in terms of how to run a company is based on these big monsters, and that doesn't work for us. Like that, how we get audience, how we get funding, how we make our work, the amount of time it takes to make our work. None of this makes any sense
For commercial theater.
For
Yeah.
commercial theater,
It's
for-
not
for-
efficient.
For the big
Yeah.
regional theaters,
Right.
it doesn't make any sense. So don't try to be that. You're not ever gonna be that. What you're gonna be is totally different. And you guys are lucky because of your generation, the way you consume things is so diverse compared to what we grew up with. Like your peers are open to all sorts of experiences. So great. Don't try to be
It's okay.
don't try to be the big old dinosaurs.
Yeah, we are constantly being defined as what we aren't. We're non-profit. We're off. You know, you have to define for yourself who you are and what it means to be successful. You have to find your own language, because it will not be given to you. It's all corporate.
And I'm excited about you guys figuring that out and then teaching it to us, because
Yeah, we're
I'm
getting
serious.
old. We
I
need you.
just went to this workshop a week ago about how to build your board of directors, and it's all based on this model that is working well for the massive institutions, and no one knows how to do it for us.
Yeah.
So I want to go to the workshop in 5 years that you teach and tell me this is how we built our board of directors, and then I'll say, oh, great.
No, they'll be like,
Yeah.
we
Now
don't
I
have
know
a
what
board
to
of, we
do.
don't even have a board of directors.
Because
Yeah.
Let's keep going just because there are a lot of questions. Yeah, Gabby?
Have you come to be able to recognize when you are approaching that line between necessary attention and preciousness? And how do you take a step back from that?
I don't know if this answers your question, but there was a performance artist, designer named Bowery, and whenever he created something that he was going to wear to the nightclubs, his question was, but where's the poison? Like there's got to be a little bit of danger, a little bit of dark, a little bit of scary. And for me, I know I'm watching something preciously, or it's being made preciously, and there's no poison. There's no risk or threat of failure.
Right, yeah. Yep, that's the key. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your artistic hunch and what that is. So what exactly is that for you and for the rest of you as well? And how do you hone and really listen to that hunch to be a piece?
Well, I'll start by saying I steal that from Moises Kaufman. That's his term that I just wrote about, but now I use it. And so I think of a hunch as something that won't stop bugging me. So it's like that question or that itch or that curiosity that keeps coming up and keeps coming up and keeps coming up until I know that the only way that it will leave me alone is if I get in a room with some collaborators and explore it. And there may or may not be a play there. So usually the hunch is either it's a question or it's something that makes me really angry. It's usually those two things. Yeah.
I'm kind of the opposite.
Great.
I think it's a hunch, but usually the idea for the next devised work comes suddenly from an unexpected place, and then I leave it alone. until I've got students in the room to figure out what this is. But it.
Well, that's the
But
difference
I
for
don't
me.
work
Yeah.
physical theater as much as these three do, and I think I'm probably more sourcing my work on non-dramatic text, trying to figure out how do we as a group bring this idea. So the last one was, I read an article about science illiteracy in this country, and I knew that our devised work would be touring schools on the Oregon coast. Let's do a show about science. What does that mean? I don't know. Not until I have the group.
Yeah, same but different.
Yeah,
Because I constantly have those things too and leave them alone. But it's the ones that keep like popping up and doing that annoying thing.
And so then
those
that
are-
becomes the next.
That's the one I know. I've got to deal with
Yeah.
that, else I can't listen to all the other ones.
I mean, Ship of Fools happened in the library. I saw the title, pulled it out, had no idea what this book was.
Go, yeah.
This'll work.
But I think it's similar in like I don't know what it is until I get collaborators. All the hunches is the impetus to get collaborators in a room,
Yeah.
and then from there, who the heck knows?
Yeah, I generally know what I'm working on, whether or not I can articulate it clearly through language or not. But I get into the room with my collaborators, with my actors, and I push it out of the room for as long as I can and work in that place, because it's always, it's so bossy. It will always try to direct the room. So I keep it there until it has to come in, and then it comes when it's ready and shows us what to do.
And when she says work, she means physically. With our work, we always start physically, doing a variety of things that we've developed over 20 years. So you can do that.
Where are those other hands that I saw before? There are a few that flashed before. Yes, sir.
Could you give me like an example timeline, especially for the people who are working in an educational setting, from first meeting to opening night? How long, like how many days a week are you working? And also, are you always the one to bring the hunch into the room, or do you ever start without a hunch and you hope to generate that from the students?
Great. You want me to start?
I teach on a quarter system here. I taught on a semester system in Missouri, but I do like a winter term class where we meet 3 days a week, like it's an advanced acting class or something, but it's not. And the whole intention is to make as much without judgment. Like, we're not going to cut, we're not going to move. We're only going to talk about structure at the very end of the term, and then we go into production. So it's like a 2-term process. In Missouri, it was the avant-garde class on top of the hunch. So I was teaching a history course basically for performers because we were getting ready to make work. I had students, when I was in Missouri, the previous devising group would decide what the hunch was for the next devising project. And it was sweet because they would come back to see what that was.
I want to give a couple extremes just so we understand that it totally depends on what your goal is and what you're making. So for the last 3 summers, I've been leading this devising intensive down in Marfa, Texas, and we literally have 12 days, and we're working 9 to 15 hours a day. And we have made like 75-minute pieces, between 60 and 75-minute pieces, fully like off book somehow, up and a full performance. So with design elements, full, go. 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks, those days. And then the process I have developed at Western that I don't always get to do because of other academic requirements and such, is a year-long process. So we're also on quarter systems, so we're on 10-week quarters. So the hunch, I'll publish the hunch and I'll articulate, again, not like this is what the show is, but this is what we're going to investigate, so that students who are interested in exploring that together will come and audition for it. And the audition process is a whole nother thing. Wrote an article about that too. And I will cast the show in spring, and then send off the company with resources, like source material that they're reading all summer. So a lot of the research starts that summer. We get together and we have a class that meets twice a week, 3 hours, and The first 5 weeks of the 10-week quarter will be based on our research, so we have a strong foundation of the material that we want to create from. Then we shift in the creation phase, and we'll just start making work. These are blurry boundaries, but we'll create a lot of material for 5 weeks. Then the class is done. Then we shift towards the development phase, and now we're in rehearsals in the evening, and usually that's again 2 nights now outside of class time, but 2 nights a week, 3 hours also, where we're starting to develop kind of the nugget of the piece and starting to do a lot more text writing. We'll develop for 5 weeks, and then we'll have a little break before we go into a 5-week rehearsal phase. So again, rehearsing the same amount of time we would for a scripted play. So that's a full year-long process. So it's cast in May, and then it performs the next May.
A great viable option if you don't have the infrastructure and you don't have the faculty, you bring in guest artists like us, and we've done this at colleges, different colleges across the country, and it's usually sometimes a week, sometimes 2 weeks. So you job in people. It's a really intense experience just to give the students a quick experience of this is devising, and it's like drinking from a fire hose, and then it's over, and then you go back to your
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you have the tools where we can give you a lot of tools in a short amount of time.
Yep. And that's what I do at Texas Tech. They just job me in for the Martha Intensive.
I think the advantage in an educational system to what Rich does for a year or what I'll do for 2 terms is ensemble.
Yeah.
I think any shorter amount of time, those students don't actually get to that level of listening that I think is valuable.
Does that help for a timeline? Great. I saw another hand flashed. Yes, in the back.
I just want a little more information about working with designers. I guess when they come into the process, if they're there at the beginning, because you're talking about collaborating. Are they there at the beginning or are they there after?
Yeah,
after a bit, and
Yeah.
are the actors telling them what they want? Are they kind of coming? How does that?
Who wants to start with that?
I mean, I think the earlier they can be in the room, the better.
Yeah.
The more they can be a part of the process of development and have a voice in the room and hear the voices of performers in the room as you're building the thing, the better.
And
Yeah,
it's terrifying. So when we were at Western this year, we had 2 weeks. We started on day 1 not knowing pretty much anything, and then we had opening night with an audience paying for tickets with full design in 2 weeks. So on day 1, we had to look at the designers and say, we have no idea what we need, but you have to start now. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially for, satin costumes, it's very, very difficult. They work really, really hard.
I think, though, one of the advantages by bringing them in that early and having that interaction is that you can start formal production meetings later. In many cases, there isn't something to design from other than the work that's being done in the room. There's no script or a book that the designer can read. But by the time we go to formal production meeting, everybody knows what we're making.
Yeah, and at least the way that works with my undergrads at Western, the designers who have been designed for that show, they have to be in the class. They have to be with the company from day 1. And it's been really fascinating. I love working with the design students so much because the devising, at least now, is so antithetical to all their training that starts with a script. And so just that courageous terror is real for them. There's something like actors we'll just get up and we'll, move around, we'll figure it out. The designer's like, I need this, but then you can just see it, the terror change to real excitement, where they understand if you will just walk through all of our costume storage and find anything that you think is scary or beautiful or if it just pulls you and get it in the room and put it on costume rack. And we'll start incorporating it when we're just training and experimenting. And the same thing, if you've got an object props designer, if you've got a sound designer, just bring an instrument in and play while we viewpoint or whatever, and suddenly the design starts leading. And for the designer to be like, wait, I'm also a creator. I'm not just a interpretive artist. I can literally have ownership of what an audience sees based on my artistic impulses. You see them accept that invitation, and then it's a whole new world for the designers that I've worked with in the devising process. I think I can say it's really changed their artistic journeys. Once they shift that, it's like a click. It's the same way for actors too, I think. There's a click that happens when you stop thinking about yourself as a interpreter and you start thinking about yourself as a creator.
Yeah, our designers don't exist only to support what the actors are making.
Mm-mm.
Right.
They're artists in their own right.
Yes.
And they push against the performers often. It's
Yeah.
great, it's very important.
And back to your thing, yeah, they are saying like, I really need this, or a designer is saying like, I just want to see what happens if I put 50 coats on you. Go actor, just do it, And then the actor's like, can we do 10? And then there's that like
The actor falls over.
Yeah, and then there's that real collaboration back and forth.
I think I should correct myself. Sometimes I've done devised works where there were source texts that could certainly invite early design conversation outside of rehearsal. We did a piece on Kafka's shortest stories, sometimes called the parables. Those were available for the designers to read early, and plenty of world building to go from there.
I want to say one more thing about that we do at Western, or that I do in our work, is it also creates an opportunity to make what I call creative containers at the very beginning of the process. So you don't have a script like Osage County that says you have to have a 2-story house on stage, right? And one of the things I hate about being a theater artist is strike and the dumpster. And so we will put creative containers on our work where we'll literally say, like, we can have this many watts in our lighting design of energy burn. We'll say we can have only 10% new raw materials that come from the scene shop or the costume shop. The rest has to be found pieces or reused pieces. And we can set that from the beginning because we don't know what we're making it for. And then again, as artists, we're like, no, I want to be free. I want to make whatever. And that, again, is chaos. And here's a real thing for us to push against. And then, okay, if you need an extra 200 watts because you want this special instead of that LED light, then you've got to argue for it and you've got to fight for it.
It's like when Robert Frost says you can't play tennis without a net. It's good to have obstacles and limitations.
Yeah.
And one of the funnest parts when we're going to teach, when we're guest artists somewhere where we're making a play in 2 weeks, usually on day 1, we'll just go walk around the scene shop and the props room and just find stuff that we've never seen before because we haven't been at your school and seen it in all those other places.
Yeah.
And like when we were at Western this summer, the show, it was a rep season, and the show before us had this massive set with all these rolling set pieces, and one of them was this beautiful, big old staircase.
Yep.
And we were just like, okay, we'll use that in our show on day 1.
Yeah.
And then you tell the actors, okay, we don't know what the play is, but
Exactly.
we know we've got this
There's
big
a
old
staircase.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's great.
Yeah. And then again, organically, the design comes as it's inextricably linked to the show because the form and the content are literally coming at the same time. Instead of here's all the content, here's the play, now let's put some form on it, i.e.
Form
design.
is content,
Form is
Rich
exactly, that's what
Brown.
I'm saying. They're
And
the
you
one.
said organically.
But we should, you know what, it's important to point out, at least in the educational environment, that there will be some pushback. I remember
To working that way.
a costume designer of mine in Missouri saying, I don't feel like I designed anything. Because the students went with her to look for clothing that they thought appropriate to whatever they were performing. It wasn't character-based. There wasn't a through line or anything like that. I had a set designer who said the same thing because there was so much coming from the students involved. He felt he had not designed the set. And then, of course, technical directors get very itchy about timeline. And
I think that's also because I'm thinking like there are some pieces I feel like I did not direct. Like
Exactly.
we did it.
I know.
You know what I mean? So it's like
Well,
I think those are the best answers.
but
actually.
that's but
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
hard.
True,
If you're in the mindset of your profession.
Right. Absolutely. Couple more questions? Yeah. Got another? Sure.
How often does this space that you're performing in inform the content or the structure?
Always.
Ooh.
Day 1.
And do you know that prior to, or do you create for an open space and then put it in a box?
Great. Good question.
Very good question. We had our own theater for 10 years. And when we had that space, we made plays that were so physically dangerous. They were choreographed literally within an inch of their
I
lives.
can literally attest to that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and we didn't know how lucky we were.
Because we were rehearsing and performing in there.
Everything,
Oh,
everything
And some of those
happened
shows
in
never
that space.
could have happened if we didn't have that
Yeah,
luxury.
we couldn't have built the plays that we did over, we would work on plays over the course of years in that space. And so they were so tightly choreographed that they could just be extremely dangerous. Then we lost the space. New York City.
And it's affecting our work for sure, because now we're rehearsing in rehearsal studios, and then
We're having to figure out, how do we get back to that place? How do we work with the same element of danger without actually hurting anyone, without killing anyone? And we're still figuring that out. It's hard. We have to just work very quickly once we get in the space. We have to work very quickly, very specifically. We have to designate a certain amount of time for only figuring out this or that physical thing in the space, instead of like teching. We have to just work on that now. So,
We were without a theater space one year, and so the space was the hunch. The only available space we had was our classroom building, Villard Hall. The whole building, including the basement, became. Then we did an immersive labyrinth project that involved over 45 students, to some not looking like they're part of the show, but there to be minders to help people get through. I would never do that project again. It was so stressful, but it was kind of an amazing project, and it was the building itself, the classrooms that they knew. So they all decided that room 300 on the 3rd floor looked like a really bad prom, so we had a really bad prom in that space. You could have your picture taken, and there was really bad music and punch.
Yeah. I've got 2 things to say, and then let's wrap up thoughts. Okay.
Yeah.
First is, I've always known the space that the piece would be performed in, and the way I talk to my students about that is that's one of the creative containers.
Yeah.
Like, we're starting on day 1. We don't know a lot, but we know opening night, that's a creative container, right? We could be Stanislavski, and we'll rehearse until it's ready. Right? We're gonna opening night, and we know it's gonna be in this space. And then we interrogate the space and start to find, what does this space already have, and try to look at it and say, the space already is enough. There's stuff here. And one of my favorite stories about that is when Tectonic Theater Project was creating Gross Indecencies, they were rehearsing, they were nothing then, they had no money. They were rehearsing in an old church, and they just found these big, huge wooden tables down in the basement, and they pulled them into the big open area that they were rehearsing in. And then if you look at photos from the off-Broadway production of Gross Indecency, you'll basically see the design that they rehearsed with that were just found objects in that church, i.e. these big, huge wood tables and these wooden benches. So oftentimes the architecture of the space that you're rehearsing in, whether it's your performance space and rehearsal space, there's something there that you can interrogate and already be enough.
Yep.
The space that will give you gifts.
So just
last
one quick
thought.
thing.
Yeah.
I do think that site-specific work, some of the site-specific work that's happening now is just really important and thrilling and
Yes.
unexpected.
Yeah.
Actually, I think we're coming right up on time, so do we have any very quick last thoughts? Mine
Make
is
work.
just do it. Yeah, make work.
Yeah, do
That's
it.
how you learn
Jump
it. You just
in.
have to make work.
Yeah, devise your own process too. Make your own process. Don't lean on other people's processes too.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for your attention. And bring work to festival. It's a great way to try. Bring a 10, 15-minute piece to festival next year.